a lot of questioning whether the growth is even worth it. It's really just a question of how do we grow the business without breaking it? It's just something that I think leaders don't focus on. They focus on growth. Growth is fun. I'm a big fan of growth. I mean, that's a big part of what we do in our business is help clients with growth. Growth without infrastructure just leads to a big mess.
Welcome to Get Unstuck and On Target, the weekly podcast that offers senior leaders insights and strategies to not only lead with competence and vision, but also to achieve groundbreaking results. I'm your host, Mike O'Neill. I coach top-level executives on the power of ethical leadership to forge teams to be as united as they are effective. In each episode, join me for insightful conversations with leaders just like you, providing practical advice to help you get unstuck and propel you and your company forward. Let's get started. When your business is growing, that's a good problem to have. But growth without the right systems and leadership in place, that's when things break. Today, I sat down with Jane Gentry, a growth architect who's been guiding CEOs through the challenge of scaling for more than 25 years. We talk about what really causes growing pains, why culture gets diluted as companies expand, and the one question every CEO should ask if they want growth to fuel momentum instead of burnout. As an executive coach, I work every day with leaders who are facing these same pressures. So if you're leading through growth, this episode will give you practical strategies that you can use right away and a reminder that you don't have to figure it out alone. My guest today is Jane Gentry. Jane works with mid-market CEOs who are growing fast, but they're feeling the strain that comes with it. With more than 25 years of experience leading and advising companies, she's built a reputation for helping leaders simplify complexity, protect profits, and build stronger leadership teams. As a leader, you may ask, why I need to kind of lean into this? Well, from my standpoint, when growth outpaces your systems, this business, it can start to strain. Decisions drag, margins shrink, and your best people get stretched too thin. Jane's Optimal Value Blueprint gives CEOs a clear framework to fix what's breaking so that growth fuels momentum instead of burnout. Welcome, Jane.
Thank you. Thank you for that nice intro, Mike.
Jane, you and I have had a chance over the last few months in particular to get to know each other. I've learned about the kinds of companies that you work with. And as we were discussing you coming on this podcast, I wanted to kind of focus on your perspective of leading through growing pains. You know, when business is growing, most people think that's good, but it does.
It is good.
Yeah. It is good, but it creates a whole new set of potential issues. You get the call when the revenue's up, but I suspect you get the call when revenue's up, but the execution is dragging.
That's usually when we get the call. Yeah, the revenue is up, but the infrastructure has not kept pace with the revenue. And infrastructure can mean anything from your organizational design, your processes and systems that you have in place, the way you make decisions in your organization, and which is kind of your bailiwick, leadership. Leadership hasn't grown. The way we lead, who is leading, the way we think about leadership in our organization, that has often not kept pace with the revenue.
Is there a pattern you see most often?
With leaders specifically?
More specific when they bring you in. Business is good, revenue's up, boy, but we're not keeping up with the infrastructure.
Yeah, a lot of confusion, a lot of questioning whether the growth is even worth it. Sometimes a leader will say, I don't even know if this is even worth it. And it's really just a question of how do we grow the business without breaking it?
Yeah.
How do we scale without breaking it? And it's just something that I think leaders don't focus on. They focus on growth.
Yes.
Growth is fun. Um, I'm a big fan of growth. I mean, that's a big part of what we do in our business is help clients with growth. But growth without infrastructure just leads to a big mess.
I hear the word infrastructure, and I imagine business founders, they might kind of go, oh gosh, infrastructure, that means everything. When you step back and say, we need to look at this, 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 and this, how do you find yourself kind of explaining in Jane Gentry terms, what is it that you're going to encourage them to do so it doesn't feel yet overwhelming like they're already feeling?
Right. Well, the key is to not blow up the culture and blow up the talent inside the culture, right? So having a pace that works for that particular company and that particular culture is really important. We have a client right now, their business is very seasonal. We're about to take a break because they're about to get completely slammed, right? And so you can't have your team focused on too many things all at once, and we sure don't want them experiencing overwhelming change to the point where you frustrate them or you lose your top talent or you reduce engagement in your organization. And so for me, that's why transition management is such a huge part of what we do. I don't know that you and I talked about this, but I tell leaders, most leaders aren't terrible at change. In other words, what are the steps of change? What are the milestones of change? What are we going to look like at the end of it? They're pretty good at articulating that. The majority of leaders fail to realize how to move people through change. And that's why a lot of over 70% of change initiatives across organizations, small to enterprise, fail. So that's something that I have a really high sensitivity to. How do we bring the people along with the change? Because it's the people that are going to affect the change in the organization. So without them, it doesn't matter how brilliant our strategy is. It will just be a big fail, right?
You describe the critical role of culture and people in adapting to what needs to be done. You mentioned you have a client that things are about to take off, so they have a limited capacity of what they can kind of focus on. Can we go back to this culture? When you use the
Yeah.
term culture, it's a term batted around quite a bit. How
Yeah.
do you define culture?
Culture is your secret sauce. Culture is the thing in the organization that is your real differentiator. And as you grow, it can get diluted.
Yes.
And so it's about agreed upon values. I remember sociology class in college. They called it values and norms. What do we accept inside our organization in terms of behavior? What are the things that we value? What are the attributes that we strive for? That's culture. And as you grow, unfortunately, that can get diluted unless you find a way to operationalize culture inside your organization. And people are surprised when I use that word with culture because they think culture is this amorphous thing that just happens inside your company, and it really isn't. I mean, there are absolutely ways to operationalize culture, starting with how you hire and onboard people, right? And so, without getting too far into the weeds on a 30-minute podcast, there are ways to operationalize culture so that as you grow, you are protecting your secret sauce.
Yes.
You are protecting that thing that works so well when you were at $10 million, but seems to not be working at 60 million or 80 million.
Yes. Now, you mentioned we don't have a lot of time to dig deep, but I guess I would love to kind of dig a little bit deeper here on this. And that is, you mentioned one example, being very purposeful in your selection and onboarding process. That's operationalizing culture. I've experienced that the folks who have been around the longest hang on to that culture and sometimes are very protective of that culture, and that the change that would be necessary for sustained growth is even harder for them. How do you operationalize culture that takes into consideration those folks who have been with the organization the longest?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. I like to use them as evangelists,
Mm,
right? I like to use them to help articulate what the culture is.
mm,
And I hone very intently in on those people in my transition management strategy. Because you want them to be an evangelist, you don't want them to be a roadblock.
yes.
And you don't want them to hold so desperately onto their perception of the culture, the old way, that they're incapable of adjusting as the company needs to adjust. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense. I'm nodding for those who are not watching.
Yeah.
I'm nodding because we very much are in sync there. I like the way that you describe that you take those folks who might be most resistant to the necessary change and make them, you call them evangelists, but there's intentionality in what you are describing. I'm obviously keying in on the people side. That's my natural
Yeah.
bias. It's
I
more
gotcha.
than that. I know it's more than that. But when you step back and you come in and the founder, the CEO looks at you and kind of looks you in the eye and says, Jane, I just don't know if growth is worth it.
Yeah.
You hear that pretty often. Um,
I hear it sometimes. And I'll tell you this, um, Mike, the CEO is really the last person who can drive culture in the
mm,
company.
tell me more.
Um, and they a lot of times think that they are the person driving culture in the company.
Mm,
When we talk about operationalizing culture, I like to kind of break down activities of ways to communicate based on your role, your seniority
mhm.
in the company. Um, because the person that people believe the most is actually not the CEO, even if it's a founder and they're beloved, by the organization. It's my direct manager that I believe
Yes.
the most, right? And so that's why enrolling all of those people early on into what we're trying to accomplish inside the organization, um, literally walking through the leaders and managers through the initiatives first, allowing them to go through this process that we call transition. And it's not as complex as the grief process. The model going through it is not simple, but the model's not complex. But allowing managers to go through it first, leaders to experience that first, um, before we roll something out into an organization is really important.
So you start with the leadership team as a whole, but then you're kind of saying in so many words, you alone, particularly you, the CEO alone, are not going to be able to drive that. You're going to have to use your organization, the people in this room and below, for this to work. To do
Well,
that, you're building also new kind of infrastructure, are you not? New ways of communicating, new ways of tracking, if you're going to be pushing that down.
yes, and change in one sense is very much a communication initiative,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the number one place I see people fail
Mm,
is we just do it. We have no messaging around it. We have no agreement around what it is or what it's going to look like. We're not enrolling our managers at different levels to understand the message. Um, we assume that people go through change as a cohort. People go through change very individually. And, I say to leaders, look, you're going to have to deliver the same message
mm,
over and over and over and over in 50 million using the different vehicles. I said, at the point where you just want to put a gun in your mouth, if you have to say the same thing one more time, you have still probably not said it enough. So that's one thing. The second thing is, people are not really struggling with change. People are struggling with loss.
Time
And
bomb.
loss is a very individually experienced, say activity, because I can't think of a better word. And oftentimes as a leader, the things that you find that people are struggling with, sometimes you just think they're dumb. Seriously. I mean, you just go, that's the thing you're worried about, you know? And it can be very frustrating for leaders. And so that's why I say it's important to arm them with an understanding not just about what we're doing, what we're trying to do, where we're trying to go in the organization, but what is this process that people are about to go through? What is it that they're going to experience? How do you show up as a leader in a way where you can either effectively Sherpa them through this change? And there's a lot of change potentially in growing pains, right? So, how do you show up to Sherpa them or to figure out this person's just not going to make it? And that needs to be okay too.
Yes. And that's part of the process, is it not? And that is, as you're
Yeah.
identifying who your Sherpas are, there are folks who that's just not them. They just don't have the either capacity or the willingness to
Well,
take on.
all leaders need to be prepared to do that in the organization. But as I said, there are also evangelists within the organization to help that, right? I'm always going to believe my peer or my direct report over a senior leader,
Yes.
pretty much almost always. Now, when you get in, the kinds of companies that we work in that are in the mid-market, it's not quite as dramatic as, say, Coca-Cola or Home Depot, right? But it's still there. It still exists.
When you made the observation, I'm going to paraphrase it. It's not so much that the strategy is flawed, but how that strategy is communicated is what I kind of heard you said, and that they need to be very intentional. You're communicating strategy over and over and over again to the point where they might feel enough is enough, but then you said you need to do it that much more.
Yeah, and you're communicating strategy, Mike, but you're also communicating why
Yep.
are we doing this? Why are we not doing other things that we could have done instead of this,
Mm.
right? Um, what is a picture of what that's going to look like at the end when we hit nirvana, right? Or whatever the end looks like. Um, what is our plan? What are the steps that we're going to use to get there? And the most important to your employees is what's my part,
Yes.
right? So I tell leaders, this is this is how you create engagement in your organization. People want to know, what is the plan? They want to know, what is my part in getting us there?
Yep.
And they want some autonomy
Hmm.
in what they do in their role to get you there.
Hmm.
That's employee engagement in a nutshell, right? And too often as leaders, we have a plan. We've either come up with on our own, or we've got somebody like Jane that we're working with, and we just start to execute the plan and leave everybody kind of in the dark about what is the plan. Where are we
Yes.
going? I like to walk through my clients' facilities and ask employees at random inside the organization, what's the strategy of the business for the next year? That is a great indication about the level of competency that leaders have had at communicating that into the organization.
Hmm.
If they can't describe where we're going and how they're going to participate in that, what their part is, what their role is in that, then we've missed a step as leaders, an important step, I'd say.
I may not say this the way I intend to say it, but let me describe it. An organization that is fortunate to be experiencing growth is experiencing growing pains. But you describe helping the leadership team convey this is where we're headed. It's kind of a destination point. This is what it will look like. This is what your role would look like. When an organization is growing fast, do you just kind of pick a point in time that in 12 months' time, we want to look like this, be like this? How do you convey that?
I was doing a podcast with a friend of ours recently, and they do like this 10-year target. Man, I don't even bother.
Yeah, it's too long.
I just don't even bother. I don't look more than 18 months out because the world moves so quickly. The market moves so quickly. I mean, for us, when we get into an organization, what I say to a leader is one of my goals is to help you, Mr. or Miss CEO, to think differently. If you are thinking the same as a leader at 50 million that you thought at 20 million, and when I say that, I'm thinking about how you think about strategy, how you think about determining what's going to happen in the organization. If you think differently, you will plan differently and you will execute differently.
Yeah.
That's the key, right? And so for me, it's about helping leaders think about strategy in a way that gives them the flexibility that they need for how fast things are moving. So if you look at it this way, Mike, what I see a lot of times in small companies, and I don't work in super small companies, but startups, they build their strategy around a budget.
Yeah.
As you grow, you tend to build your strategy around objectives. And that's where I see a lot of companies get stalled out, leaders get stalled out. Where we'd like to see them get to is building their strategy around assumptions. And creating a kind of, one of my partners calls it a thermometer for figuring out where we are every 90 days or every quarter around those assumptions. And what do we do if we discover that one of those assumptions is incorrect?
Yeah.
And when I say assumptions, about our capabilities, about our market, about the marketplace and the world as a whole. What are tariffs going to do to our business? What is our competitor doing right now? What are the assumptions we're making as we figure out what we're going to do in our business? And what are the checkpoints we have to figure out that we were on target with those assumptions or we were not? And here's how we're going to adjust. That's a sophisticated way of looking at strategy. And that's where we try to get leaders in the organizations that we're working with. When you strategize that way, you plan completely differently inside your organization for what's going to happen. But still, to your point, 18 months, 2 years is about the furthest that I even bother to. Now, do you want to have like a BHAG, your big, hairy, audacious goal for 10 years out? Sure. But I'm not spending a whole lot of time building out strategy any further out than 18 months.
You describing this as looking at and challenging assumptions almost on an ongoing basis. That's very refreshing. You've been doing this for a while. You lend your expertise and your experience in your role as a mentor to the Harvard MBA program.
Yeah.
Tell us a little more about that. These students, if I could use that term, that you're working with, are they in a career going back and get an MBA, or are these folks who...
It is the MBA program. It is Harvard's MBA program. It's a course. The place where I mentor and coach with them is in is in a course they have called entrepreneurial sales.
Mm.
So the people that take this class are in Harvard's MBA program. They typically know that at some point in their career, they want to buy a business or own a business.
Yeah.
And they have the savvy or the wherewithal to realize that while they might never be the salesperson for their organization, that is a really critical function for their organization, and they want to understand what does it look like.
Mm-hmm.
And so, Mark Roberge, who leads this class, who's kind of the guy that put HubSpot on the map, I think he's a brilliant man, um, put this class together. And it's very experiential, which is the other thing I think is brilliant about it. So they'll learn in class an aspect of sales, let's say sales process. They have a partner that they work through the semester, and they and their partner go on to a platform called Gong, and they either record a role play or they whatever it is that they're working on in that particular week. And then I go and watch that activity after they're done, and I take notes and I give them a grade, and then we meet. And I coach them through that activity. Why did you take this approach? What were you thinking when you did this? Here's maybe another way to think about that. Um, and although I used to do a lot of working with salespeople in my job. I don't do that quite as much anymore. But I do this because I love let's face it, I'm in a different generation than these people,
Me too.
and I wanna understand how they think. They're the leaders of the future.
Mm-hmm.
I wanna understand what they're struggling with. I wanna see where we're different. Um, and these are the up and coming leaders for my clients as well. This is the age group of up and coming leaders for my client organizations. So, so that's why I do that.
Well, as admirable as that is, I know that you get things out of that you can share with clients. What might be some things that you've experienced mentoring Harvard MBA students? How has that made you better at what you do for your clients?
Um, Well, this has been something of mine since millennials were the people everybody considered problem children. Millennials are, I think, in their 40s now, right? So we can't keep using millennials. Um, it's validated for me some things that I guess I already knew because the data's there to support the fact that there are some gaps coming out of not Harvard specifically, but all graduate programs around critical thinking,
Mm.
situational awareness, um, soft skills, relationship building. I'll tell you, one of the things these young people have to do in this program is cold call.
Mm.
And I remember saying to a student, "So where did you struggle with that?" He said, "I think it's so rude to call somebody on the phone." Really? Tell me more about that. How would you communicate with him? Well, I would text him.
Yeah.
And I said, well, let me tell you something that might blow your mind. I hate getting texts from people. I especially hate getting texts with an action item from people because once I've read it, it's gone.
Yeah.
Um, if it's in my inbox, for example, it's still in my inbox until I take action against it, right? And And they couldn't believe that I didn't like getting text. I said, "I hate text." Um, Text is a relationship killer as far as I'm concerned, and email gets used incorrectly as well. So we got into this conversation, and I said, "So what do you think the key learning is here?" And this was a bright student. They're not all that way, but, he said, understand your audience? I said, yeah, I think that is the lesson, right? How does the person that you're dealing with prefer to be communicated with? And just generationally, we have different ways that we, um, to make a sweeping statement, which obviously isn't true of every single person, but generationally, we have different ways we prefer to be communicated with. And then inside a generation, I would assume there are, people have different preferences. And so it just goes back to knowing your audience, really. But those are the kinds of things, right? Every once in a while, a female student will ask me a question about, i- you know, the way they're being taught to do something. Don't you think that's kind of harsh for a woman to do that? Or, they'll have questions like that. Um, but I think for me, it's validated that a lot of times leaders in mid market organizations will tell me they don't have the time or the money to do training and development inside their organization. Um, and I argue you don't have time to not do it, but these are some of the scenarios that I give them for why it's so important. You might hire somebody out of an MBA program, but there's some pretty critical things that they're probably still missing that are valuable um, to their to your organization and that are critical to their success in your organization. On my podcast, I just had a leader. I interview CEOs of mid-market organizations, and this guy comes from the military. And I find that military, most leaders with a military background are committed to development more so than the average bear.
Yes.
Why? Because the military is is co is at the same time developing you for the job you're in and developing you for the job you're about to get, right? And so he sends them off to, some class at Wharton or some class at Harvard or some, online program to make them better. Um, I think all mid-market leaders need to have a commitment like that somehow. I'm not saying send them to an Ivy League program, but there are things you can do and there are things you should do to develop people inside your organization.
Well,
Do it or lose them. It's really that simple.
I am obviously smiling because that's something that we also do. Yes,
Yeah.
I do coach, but we're known primarily for our leadership development. One of the things I
Yes.
remember from graduate school was training really is preparing them for their current job. Development
Yeah.
is preparing them for the next.
And I look at that a little bit differently, Mike. So between the two of us, we probably have a really good definition of that. For me, training is understanding the concept. So you can put people through 8 million training classes.
Mm.
It will not change their behavior without development. Development is the coaching, the stretch assignments, the exposure to other types of functions in your organization that change behavior. The way I look at it is, I play golf. I can watch YouTube videos about golf. I can read about golf. I can watch golfers. That's training. That's intellectually understanding the way I'm supposed to strike the ball. An hour with a pro will do more to change my game every time than a dozen hours of those other things because because there's that gap between understanding it intellectually and being able to do it where development plays a role. And even a mid-market organization can take a high potential person in their organization and match them, give them an important initiative in the organization and pair them with a leader
Yep.
who can track them and mentor them. Um, every mid-market organization can do that. You just need to spend the time and the energy and the thoughtfulness on what is that initiative, who is the right leader to put them with, how do we structure this in a way that is going to uh, create the right kind of learning for them. how do we protect them as much from failure as we can while enabling them to fail, right, inside of that process. So I push back on pretty much every single leader that tells me that they don't have the time or the budget for that. You might not have the budget for a big training program. I'd argue that a big training program isn't really the thing that's going to move the needle the most anyway. So I'm kind of okay with that, you know? But there are multiple opportunities to develop people inside your organization, even at a mid-size level.
Jane, we've had a series of conversations / meetings / coffees / lunches over the last few months. And one thing I've always enjoyed in our conversations is you do offer perspectives that I might not think of.
Ditto.
More often, though, the kinds of things you're suggesting are the kinds of things that really resonate with me. What I love is your practicality. For leaders listening to this episode today, let's say these leaders are experiencing the strain of growth. What might be one practical step that they can take this week that would help them create greater clarity?
We don't work in the theoretical because that doesn't really create a lot of movement for our clients. We have to get practical. Um, One of the things I think that you can do is have a very serious look in the mirror and ask yourself, where am I the bottleneck in the organization? You know, one of the reasons we look at things like org design is org design facilitates decision making and accountability. Where do those things happen in your organization? And we want decisions to get pushed as low, as far down the organization as possible, where we'll still experience success, right? We find that a lot of leaders, especially if you're a founder leader in an organization, have a really hard time letting go. I'll tell you, Mike, I had a conversation a few weeks ago with a man who's hugely successful. He founded a company, it's now at $500 million.
Mm.
He said, I don't know if I'm the guy to lead us into the future. I said, well, that's a thoughtful and powerful question. Let me ask you a question. How much in the weeds are you on a daily basis? He said, pretty far. And he gave me 3 examples of things he was solving in that moment. And I said to him, okay, so I would argue then that you're not in a position right now to ask yourself if you're the guy for the future, because actually you're not doing the CEO job today. You're doing the CEO job and 3 other people's jobs. And so, in order for you to be at a place where it's even fair to ask yourself that question, we have to figure out how to get you to let go of these other things. Is there not enough structure that makes you comfortable to let go of it? Do you feel like you don't have the right talent to be able to let go of it? Is it just, your personality and we got to get you some coaching to let go of it? But until you do that, it's not even a fair question, really, because you're not doing your job. And so I would say, if you don't think you can have an honest look on your own, ask a person that reports to you that you value their opinion and say, where am I the holdup here? Because I think you'd be surprised where you think you've just empowered and enabled everybody in your organization, and they'll come back to you and go, yeah, not so much.
Jane, as regular listeners know, this is an unscripted conversation, but you've shared considerable wisdom with us today. Thank you for doing that. If folks want to learn more about you and how you work, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
You can find every way to connect with me on our website, which is Jane Gentry, spelled GENTRY.com. I'm on LinkedIn. We're on YouTube. Um, as long as you don't reach out to Jane Gentry, the dead poet from Kentucky, who sometimes ranks higher than me,
Rats.
I'm pretty easy to find. That lady's not going to get back to you anytime soon because she passed away. But yeah, I'm pretty easy to find. But the great place to start is the website.
All right, then we will include the website. We will include your LinkedIn profile. We will not put your cell phone on it because you don't want text necessarily. But if you do, give us your phone number. They can call
Oh,
you.
you're welcome
Don't
to have my
text.
cell phone, 404-372-1417. But there's a lot of content on the website. You get a really good sense of how we think, how we solve for things. And I think that's important. If you're going to work with a person like us, you want to make sure that you think they're trustworthy and you think that they've solved the things that you're struggling with. So that's why I say the website's a great start. The other way to hear how I think is on my podcast, which is called CEOs Unscripted. So I like a good unscripted conversation, Mike. I have conversations with mid-market CEOs that are also for those brave enough to have an unscripted conversation. So that's another place you can really get a sense of the way I approach things.
We'll make sure we include a link to your podcast
Yeah.
as well. As we close this episode, I invite our listeners, if what Jane shared today resonates with you, I really encourage you to connect with her directly. You'll find those links in the show notes. And if today's conversation sparks something about your own leadership, maybe how you're showing up, the clarity that you bring to your team, or the culture that you're shaping as you grow, I'd love to help you think it through. I offer complimentary game plan sessions by invitation only. These are focused coaching conversations where we'll tackle one leadership challenge that really matters to you. There's going to be no pitch, no pressure, just clarity and a practical next step. So if you or someone you know could benefit from a game plan session, you'll find that link in the show notes as well. And to everyone listening, I hope this episode has helped you get unstuck and on target. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Get Unstuck and On Target. I hope you've gained insights to help you lead with confidence and drive your organization forward. Remember, at Bench Builders, we're committed to your success, your leadership excellence, and your strategic growth. If you've enjoyed our conversation today, please leave a review, rate, and subscribe to keep up with our latest episodes. This show really grows when listeners like you share it with others. Who do you know who needs to hear what we talked about today? Until next time, I encourage you to stay focused on the target and continue to break new ground on your leadership path.
This show is powered by Media Leads. To get your next great podcast produced, go to MediaLeadsCo.com.